Hey, well, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us for another Is There More to Life Than Netflix? I'm in a different and quite echoey location tonight, so apologies for that. We have no internet at our house at the moment, so I've run down to the cafe and I'm using the internet there. So I'm sure those of you who've been to Storyhouse recognize the penny house behind me here and the decor there. And I'm sure, as we are, you're missing this place too. But yeah, so for this evening at all, you can at least see it. So this evening, we're going to be talking again about a topic related to faith during this time. And this evening is for absolutely everyone. So particularly those who are skeptical, who have questions and comments and things they want to say. So the whole time we're on here, we're going to be encouraging you to add your own comments and ask your own questions below. If you tap them out, we can see those. That'd be great. And we're aware that, this week brings with it particular kind of challenges. And those challenges are related to issues of race. And both of us had the instinct very soon on that even though that was the most pressing subject this week and the thing it would be great to talk about, we are not qualified to talk about it. Two white guys sharing their thoughts and feelings on race issues in the church and all, it's just not appropriate. And we did reach out, but we couldn't get anyone to kind of join us with that kind of perspective who could teach us, talk us through it. And I know for myself, as I've been listening to the podcasts and being challenged about my own perspectives, that I come from a point of ignorance and just needing to learn a lot about this. So what we've chosen to do is not to talk about that, because we can't talk about it in any kind of authoritative or helpful way. Rather, we're both in the mode of listening right now and learning. So instead, we're going to talk about something that we feel we are a little bit more equipped to talk about, and that was the use and misuse of the Bible. And again, tonight is for skeptics, for people who are believers in the Bible, not believers in the Bible, wherever you kind of sit on that spectrum. We want to hear all your thoughts and questions. Mr. Trump, as he's been called this week, has very helpfully handed us to on a platter this issue of how faith relates in the public square, whether the Bible belongs there or not. Is it a prop? Is it something to be used in private? All of these kind of questions. And so that's what we're going to be looking at tonight, because we do know some stuff about that, and we are a pair of dumb white guys ourselves, so we can talk about other dumb white guys. And I'd like to introduce the other dumb white guy, my good friend Andy Bond. Andy, hello.
Hi, Dave. Thank you for that introduction. That's a real privilege to be invited like that. So there we go.
Good evening, Paul Beardwood. Just to show that, what you say below, we can see as well. So good evening, Paul. Lovely to have you with us. So yes, this whole thing kind of kicked off this week because essentially, for the sake of a photo opportunity outside a church, a largely peaceful protest was broken up to make sure that President Trump could stand there, have his photo taken holding up a Bible. And without getting into all those debates and pro-Trump and which side you're on, and in fact, something that we'll get onto later is how actually we don't think historic Christianity belongs to either side of the political spectrum. Still a little teaser for later, but actually, without going anti-Trump, all that kind of thing, when you do read the news reports and hear the eyewitness testimonies on the ground, it does seem a largely peaceful protest was violently broken up so that the president could have a photo op with the Bible, which has got a lot of Christian leaders around the world somewhat riled, as that just doesn't sit right with the faith that we know about. So we want to talk about faith in the public square. Does the Bible belong there? How are you to read it? All of that kind of thing. So we're going to start off by Andy asking you what your kind of initial, say, emotional gut reaction was when you heard about what had happened with Trump and his Bible photo op.
Yeah, I think I'm often quite hesitant to comment on political things online, just for a number of reasons, really. But one of which is that it can be incredibly divisive. So there's a lot of things I do comment on. I'm not I don't often take pictures of my dinner, but I kind of take pictures of places I'm walking, or my family, or my kids. But when it comes to politics, I tend to try and stay at a bit of a distance. But there's a tweet that caught my eye, and not that I do all of my kind of social thinking from social media, but there is some definitely does help. And there's a lady called Rebecca McLaughlin, and she wrote an incredible book actually called Confronting Christianity, sort of thinking about some of the objections. I don't know if you've read that, but she tweeted this. She's a Brit who lives in the States, and she said, "Here's the thing with the Bible. It's meant to be read, not brandished. And then it drives you to your knees in repentance. And then it shows you a brown-skinned saviour on a cross who has loved you to death and back and calls you to worship him as Lord and God. And worshipping this king, it means working for justice." And I kind of, it was a thread of hers. And it just, I mean, I kind of copied and pasted it and reshared it. I just, that's incredible. You know, the thing about the Bible is it's not to be brandished. You know, it's meant to be read. And I think a number of commentators said, actually, you know, he was standing there with a closed Bible in front of a closed church. And, you know, there's something intriguing about that the Bible isn't just meant to be kind of held aloft, but it is meant to be read. And it felt like what we were seeing was it being used as almost a prop, as a symbol, as almost a piece of, dare I say it, propaganda of, look, you know, hi, look, guys, you know, I'm for you. I hold your Bible. And there are lots of examples where, you know, in the Old Testament of the Bible, where perhaps Israel tend to use things as kind of as almost props, like the Ark of the Covenant. There's a story where they go out and they think they're going to win a war because it kind of goes out in front of them, and then they lose it because they're kind of not using it to point to God. They're using it as a kind of a symbol or a prop or something like that, and it just didn't sit right with me at all.
Yeah, completely. And one of the things we were kind of talking about today as we were back and forth and about what to talk about tonight was Amos 5. So Amos, as we would call it, one of the minor prophets, not because it's less important, just because it's shorter. It's one of the later books in the Old Testament. And the reason it's so pertinent is because it kind of made famous in popular culture by Martin Luther King, who quoted it in his I Have a Dream speech. But the bit that's famous is connected to a much bigger kind of section which relates to this. So Andy, I think you've got it in front of you, if you don't mind.
I do, yeah. So I won't read the whole thing, don't worry. But this bit is quite famous, really, if you've been around church very much. And it says this is God speaking. He says, I despise your religious festivals. Your assemblies are a stench to me. Not talking about school. Even though you bring me burnt offerings and grain offerings, I will not accept them. Though you bring choice fellowship offerings, I will have no regard for them. Away with the noise of your songs. I will not listen to the music of your harps, but let justice roll on like a river, righteousness like a never failing stream.
Yeah, so there you go. There's that famous line, righteousness rolling like a river. But the context of it is this word from God that basically these people who were, let's put it in contemporary terms, go into church, singing the worship songs, doing all the right things, looking very Christian on the outside, were acting unjustly towards the people around them. And therefore, God wanted nothing to do with their church going, their Bible reading, their worship songs, singing, you know, all of that kind of stuff. It's basically null and void because they were not acting justly towards their neighbors. And this is one of the things that I think happens. We're kind of jumping ahead a bit. I think this feels like a good point to talk about it, is that we often think of, you know, justice-minded people being, you know, towards the left of the political spectrum. So, you know, you're more Labour supporters in the UK or Democrat in the US, you know, whatever. And then, you know, you stricter laws and making sure everyone is behaving well, and that's your more right-leaning spectrum. But what we see in the Bible is something that sits outside of this spectrum altogether, and where actually justice is a necessary part of being a Christian. It's a necessary kind of part of worship. And I think for those who know that and who are immersed in the world of the Bible, that's why something like that happened with Trump's photo op is so kind of upsetting, because you've got the outward form of kind of the worship in the Bible and the church and the building and stuff, but completely divorced from the justice side. And that's kind of why it riled so much. But it's also why I think Christians often get misunderstood in kind of popular culture and in the media, because we don't sit on the left-right spectrum, but actually in a place outside of that. Andy, I know that was kind of going to be your point. I kind of stole it. So do you want to jump in and talk on that a bit?
Yeah, I think, again, it's not something I comment a lot. And one of the reasons I wouldn't comment online about it very much is because I'm aware that, like you, I'm sure I have friends who sit both on, you know, right and on the left politically. And my heart when I put stuff online is, you know, when it's kind of in relation to faith things, is actually it would point people to Jesus. Like I want ultimately people to investigate Jesus, whether they think it's all made up, whether they think it's a fairy tale, whether they're intrigued. And the danger is that we put, there's put extra stumbling blocks, we put extra things in their way that stop them from investigating that. And if I've got a friend who's a staunch Labour supporter and they hear that, actually you need to be a Tory to go to church, they're not going to touch it with a barge pole. But similarly, if I've got a friend who's on the right who thinks, oh my goodness, I need to embrace this kind of politics in order to come to faith or in order to go to church, then similarly that can be a stumbling block. And so I don't comment about it very much in that way, but I think there are certain issues where Christians would take perhaps a more right-leaning approach. So often I guess, and again, I'm no political expert, but often the right is summarized as being kind of big on personal responsibility and some of the other things. And Jesus, in some of the things he says, he's really quite strong on that. You think on the Sermon on the Mount in terms of the things to do with people's relationships and other things. He's like, even if you do this, and even if you think this, then that's not good. It's not just what we do, but even what we think. But then on the other side, he's blessed are the poor, blessed are the meek in spirit, which sounds like an incredibly kind of left-wing view. And so I know Christians will sit on both sides, but there's something which transcends that. And I think particularly as we're seeing culture polarize, and many people end up with, they talk about echo chambers, don't they, where basically kind of listen to the same sort of opinion again and again and again, and we can block people we don't like, or we can unfriend or unfollow, and suddenly we're in this place where all we hear is voices like ours. For Christians, we've got to kind of take our approach to things from the scriptures, not just from our politics. And for all of us, I think that's a danger. All of us will probably naturally lean slightly more left or more right, and the danger is that we can end up with the polarization going further one way or the other. And the challenge is to keep coming back to the voice of Jesus and teaching of the whole scriptures, and go, what does this teach us? What does this say?
And this is something worth explaining to someone who's maybe not used to reading the Bible, is the reversal of how we would normally read a book. I've heard one person put it like the book reads you. And a quote that I heard this week was along the lines of, is this book the word of God? It says, if you're holding it, it may or may not be the word of God, but if it's holding you, then it probably is the word of God. And it's this idea that actually, so in our technical terms, we both went to Vicar Factory, as we were saying last week. This is the difference between exegesis and eisegesis. It's this idea of like, it's very easy to come to the Bible with your own ideas and find, bits and pieces that support what you believe. And as we said, like there's some things in the Bible that look extremely left-wing. There's some things in the Bible that look extremely right-wing. So it's really easy to do a piecemeal reading that supports the views that you already have. But, as we were encouraged in college to do exegesis. So the difference is eisegesis, I read into the text the things I want to see. Exegesis, I let the text speak its truth to me, bringing it out of the text. And the trick and the way to kind of read the Bible, as you and I would do it, is to let the text speak with authority over us and change our views and change how we see the world. And then it becomes the authority for how we understand the world, how we see the world, how we believe, all that kind of thing. So it is very possible for two human beings to sit down and read this same book, and for one person to find all the confirmation bias they need for everything they already believe, and for someone else to be radically changed and to find themselves quite naturally in this space that we're talking about, where they no longer sit within the Western political spectrum, but actually their beliefs kind of sit somewhere else outside of it. And I think maybe, it was that particular hypocrisy that we were, you're seeing with the Trump thing. And, the other thing that made it even more famous was the video that kind of started spreading like wildfire on social media yesterday, which was, bless him, James Corden's dad. He's just this really lovely guy. Used to be a Christian book salesman. And so James got him on his show to a bit of a light-hearted how you can hold your Bible, and he's showing like the underarm and the pizza box and like all kind of stuff like that. It was a really well done bit of video. But like James's dad, bless him, just kind of stole the opportunity to read a bit of Bible for everyone who was listening as well, because he's a guy who kind of loves his Bible. But one of the things he kept saying was, in his opinion, he didn't think that Mr. Trump had opened his Bible and read it. And again, we don't want to place ourselves on the spectrum because we don't belong in it, and we don't want to get party political, all that kind of stuff. And we don't know what goes on in a person's heart, etc., etc. But even if he had opened it, there is every possibility he could have read it, found confirmation for everything he already believed, and not been changed at all. And he would be far from alone in that experience, right?
So Dave, how would you? So you're obviously talking about the text being authoritative over us and allowing it to speak into us and read us. How would you encourage somebody to go? How would you encourage somebody to do that? Somebody who's kind of new to this stuff, or even somebody who's been around stuff for a while. How would you encourage them to begin to explore that?
Yeah. So So I've kind of changed school a little bit on this in terms of which part of the Bible do you start on? And I used to, I would have been someone who said, just read it all, read all of it. And Lizzie, my wife, and I have been kind of slowly reading through the Bible this year. We were going to do it really quick, and that didn't happen. So we've been reading it front to back. No, go on.
No, even during COVID, with all the extra time you were given.
I know, it's amazing, isn't it? That was our thinking, but it turns out that's not how it works.
Okay.
But anyway,
fair enough.
So there we go. So we are reading through it, and I just kind of realized going through it again. Do you know what? For all that I want to say that anyone can pick up the Bible and read it and all that kind of thing, there are bits of it that are just difficult to read. There are bits that need explanation. There's just no way getting around it. Like, there's a bit where you need someone who knows a bit of the history, who knows a lot more of the Bible, who can explain where this all fits in, all that kind of thing. So I would now say to someone, this is where I'm at. Sorry, long way answering your question, Andy. Sorry.
That's right. No, you're getting there. You're getting there. It's good. Keep going.
We're getting to a good place. Getting to a good place. I would now recommend someone who is new to the Bible, who hadn't read much of it, start with the Gospel. So the Gospels are Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. They're 4 accounts of the life of Jesus put together from eyewitness testimony. And they're all kind of strung together with slightly different emphases of what Jesus was up to and what he was about. So you've got Matthew, which, a lot of people say is slightly more Jewish, and it's definitely more teachy. It's more about what you can learn from Jesus. There's like Luke, who's got a big emphasis on the outsider. So if you're all about justice, definitely start there. There's Mark, who's short. So if you want the shortest one,
short Mark, petite Mark, little Mark.
Yeah. Little Mark, whose favorite word is immediately. It's like every story ends with and immediately. It's like
Somebody said to me he was like the Michael Bay of kind of gospel writing, because it's all thriller, no filler. It's just bang, 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 bang. It's how Mark seems to work.
Exactly. Yeah. No, it is exactly. It is. He's just like boom, 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 firing it out, all that kind of stuff. And then finally, John, which is the most different one. It's like John. Obviously, don't know him personally. He lived 2,000 years ago. But my impression from John is he's an artist. He's a poet. And a bit of a philosopher, and it's got that kind of more arty, philosophical, big picture kind of feel to it. So wherever you're at, there's going to be a gospel that kind of like suits you. Of course, I love them all. But these documents, the Gospels, were written to be passed all around the world from the eyewitnesses of the people who knew Jesus, because they had this unique experience of encountering him, being transformed by his life and his teaching, his miracles, and what happened in his life. And they wanted everyone else to have that experience. So they put together kind of a highlight reel of Jesus' life to go like this, in order for you to learn from Jesus. So I would read a gospel imaginatively, like imagine yourself in the scene, imagine Jesus teaching you, imagine watching Jesus do these things, and what's going on in there. And then because the journey of a disciple isn't often, or certainly wasn't for them, just instant decisions, yes or no, this is it, this isn't it. They kind of went through this journey of understanding, first of all, that this Jesus was not a regular human being. He could heal the sick and all this kind of thing. So they thought he was like a miracle worker, which was a category of human being that was around at the time. And then from there, he started to say things that were just unprecedented. So the teachers at the time, they always referred to what we call the Old Testament. All their arguments were built on it, but Jesus would just make statements about things that just astonished people. And so they were like, well, he's a prophet. And so they had prophets in their history, people who were able to say fresh words from God. And so he's like this miracle worker. And then they came to see him as the Messiah, which is a technical term. It's a person chosen by God uniquely to bring about a new history. And then he dies and then rises again, and he breaks all of their categories. And a lot of the New Testament is just trying to figure out, what that means, because they realize that Jesus is actually the Son of God. He is, and then it takes a next few hundred years for Christians to get their mind and the language around all that kind of stuff, which is a long way around saying, like, you can walk that same journey as those first disciples did by reading a gospel and thinking for yourself, who can say these kind of things? What kind of person is he? Who can do these kind of things? And a lot of historic work has been done recently on the Gospels. And, it was the case, in the early part of the last century, that everyone wanted to believe that the Gospels were written hundreds of years after Jesus, and a lot of it was kind of made up, all that kind of stuff. And then as they've carbon dated and looked back at these documents, they've like, for some people, grudgingly had to admit that these are original documents. They come from the time, they come from the eyewitnesses, the people that actually knew Jesus. And so you are experiencing firsthand his words, his actions, as they were experienced by the people who met him. And the other reason I say to do that kind of journey is there's this other amazing book I read called Son of Hamas. And it's about how the son of one of Hamas's founders, if you don't know Hamas, it was a terrorist organization and political party in Palestine, still is. And one of the sons of the founders actually converted from Islam to Christianity. And his own journey, to me, just reminded me so much of those first disciples, where at first he's like, I like this Jesus. He talks a lot about peace, and he has practical ideas to bring about peace. And I see a lot of violence where I live, and so I like this idea. And then he gradually got his head around that he was like some kind of major prophet, and then eventually, and after years, realized that this Jesus was actually God. But it took him a longer time to overcome all his emotional and intellectual obstacles. And I think, a document like the Gospels gives you the time and the space to kind of do that kind of thing. And so, you might be right now alongside a lot of people, like, super kind of angry about what's going on in the world, and you want some peace and some justice. And Jesus talks a lot about that and shows a new way of life that offers that. And maybe you come to him for that first, how that actually could be a better way, and look at the kind of things he taught and the kind of life that he modeled, and kind of jump off from there. So that's what I'd say, which was a super long answer to what you asked, but a good question, Andy.
No, it is. Yeah. It's just helpful for people, isn't it? When they, very often people have never read the Bible. I'm sure you get lots of people, kind of in your church. We certainly get a number that come to us, and people have just never read it. They might have seen it, but they've never read it, or perhaps they've heard a story at school, or that's increasingly less, and they just don't know how it works. And so you have to. And then people feel embarrassed about asking questions. I know you said last week about people messaging in questions. We'd love you to drop us a line if you've got any kind of questions about it. Can't claim to have all the answers, but we'd love to try and have a go at answering things. But so very often when I'm speaking from the front preaching, I'll start off and I'll say, look, this is not just one book; it's a bunch of books together. There's a split, not down the middle, but kind of 2/3, which is kind of Old Testament and New Testament. The Old Testament is the bit before Jesus. The New Testament is the bit about Jesus and after, in terms of his life on earth. And there's lots of different sorts of books in there. So you've got kind of bits that are poetry, things that are prophecy, things that are history, things that are kind of narrative or songs, or this is, and in terms of reading it well, I think you were really helpful in terms of explaining the Gospels. But you wouldn't read I've often heard it said, if you picked up a book and it was a cookbook, it would have a recipe in it, and you wouldn't read the way you read a recipe the same as if you picked up a book of poetry. And so when we come to the scriptures, when we come to the Bible, you have to ask the question, what sort of thing am I reading? so that you kind of begin to get your head around it, which and a lot of people just don't know that, and that's absolutely fine. But often people are embarrassed to ask. So I would encourage you to ask. Maybe even another way would be to find somebody. I know, Dave, at your end, you've got guys at Story House who would love to kind of sit down and read the Bible with people. Just a great way to kind of read one-to-one with somebody, read a little bit, ask some questions, maybe read with a few people. Can be a great way to begin to engage as well.
Yeah, and again, one of the reasons we did tonight was because I kept having this experience during lockdown where I'd have phone conversations with various people who were new to the faith, like they were new Christians, and they had these questions that they were just enormous to them and kind of almost insurmountable. And actually, they were really common questions. And so once I talked that through with them, they were like, oh, it's as simple as that. And then they were able to kind of move forward after that. And so, get in touch one-to-one with us through Facebook, through our website, whatever. Or if you know Andy, just message Andy. Because often these questions that you think it's not okay to ask, just ask everyone else. And, if you are feeling brave enough to ask them on YouTube or Facebook, pop them in the comments. Because I guarantee there'll be someone else watching who has got the same question. Talking of comments, Matthew first got a good point here. He's saying it may well be the case that there's a position on the left-right spectrum that lends itself most to the Christian vision of living out faith in the world. Also, it's not right to say that Christians don't belong on the left-right spectrum, because that undermines the ministry of Christians in politics who've taken a position on the said spectrum because of their faith and not in spite of it. Yep. So, it's a really good point. There are people who are deeply involved in politics because of their faith, and they've associated with a political party and somewhere on that spectrum because of their faith. But again, it's kind of interesting that you will find people passionate about their faith and their politics in both parties. We could name some Christians who passionate Christians, definitely, for real Christians, not just public Christians, in both Conservative, Lib Dem, and Labour parties, at present and historically.
And I know I read somebody about this a few years ago, and they said one of the reasons for that is, so an easy example, I guess, would be that the Bible is really clear that we need to care for the poor. I mean, I don't think any Christian would dispute that. The Bible is just really, straight down the line. Christians need to be people that care about the poor. But the answers you give into terms of how you do that are less clear. So some people will say this would be through the state, and they would take a perspective that way. This is how we need to make sure this happens. And others would say it would be about, and again, this is summarizing and grossly kind of oversimplifying, but others would say it would be through kind of job creation and entrepreneurship and, kind of business and the market and whatever. And that would be ways in which you'd empower people to get out of poverty. And there's lots of discussions of which I'm not an expert at all. But so caring for the poor, vital, but the political answer that is given to that could be different. And therefore, that's why people may end up on the left, or they could end up on the right, depending on a number of factors. I would argue.
Yeah. So maybe one way of putting that is they're agreeing on the why, but not the how, as to use Simon Sinek kind of quote.
Yeah. So the why, you've got to care for the poor, but how that comes about. And I suppose one of the challenges in our culture is that people think that people who have a different how are stupid, unloving, uncaring, bigoted, fluffy. Depending on where people sit, they can't see that the person on the other side, and they might be a person who lacks integrity, or they might be whatever. But often, I think people do have really good reasons for it. They may just differ in terms of how they put that into practice. And I know different cultures, Christians probably may take a different perspective. More so. I think in one of the books I read spoke about how conservative Christians in the States couldn't believe it when they came to Europe and found people, agreeing with something like the NHS or, kind of state benefits. They're like, this is unchristian, but actually it wasn't. It was just simply, it was not not the way they put the how into practice in the States.
Yeah, completely. And I think, again, one of the massive problems with this is the tribalism side of things, and I think that's one of the. So I'm going to tiptoe into the race arena that we said we were kind of going to steer clear of tonight. But having read multiple comments like this now, what was a trickle is now becoming a stream of kind of African Americans and even Black people in the UK who are part of predominantly white evangelical churches, feeling isolated, victimized because of people's tribal beliefs around certain political parties and individuals that included quite racist beliefs and policies that those people in those tribes just didn't see were incredibly hurtful to people who were within the same church. And so it's actually the kind of political tribe that was causing divisions within the church. And then, similarly, I mean, so much of the New Testament is written around this issue of people forming tribes around personalities. So take the politics out of it. There's a church that's written to because they've all got their favorite church leader, and they're like, one's like Team Paul and one's Team Apollos and whatever, and they're all kind of split up, and then so tales all the time type thing. But and again, it's one of these things around the kind of justice issue, is that God seems to be a God of reconciliation and bringing together one people under him. And one of the early experiences of the church was it was quite unique in bringing Jewish and non-Jewish together. It's quite unique for bringing people from different parts of the economic spectrum together, and so on and so on. And again, loads of the New Testament was written to deal with the problems that were flaring up because of that. But it was it was God that started it. It was God's great plan that his family would come from all the different races, all the different nations of the world.
Yeah, I think we do have a human propensity, don't we? Too, we do tend to just split up. I mean, we see it with football teams. I know in your great city, I've heard that there's rumours that there might be two teams that kind of the city divides over. Which
families even.
I've heard rumours, about that. But we do, don't we? So things that are more major and more minor, and I suppose, and the church is not immune to that. But I think it's interesting that politics has become increasingly polarized, and I think for me as a Christian, it's increasingly we have to keep trying to come back to the Bible and say, actually, we need to have our kind of our beliefs, our worldview, our understanding, the way that we look at things. The kind of, some people would say, it's the glasses, the lenses we wear. Kind of, we see things through a biblical way. Because it's so easy to be shaped by everything else, and all of us have our blind spots. I think if there's one thing, again, not to go on to tiptoe around that, but one thing that the last few days has shown us that many of us have blind spots in various ways, and that can be in all sorts of things. So, I think the scriptures hopefully begin to do that, and I guess as we read it as community as well. That's the other thing, that we don't just. This isn't an individual kind of pursuit. Actually, we sit on the shoulders of 2,000 years of people that are, I think I read the other day that somebody said, we're not the first to read the Bible, and we're not the most intelligent people to read the Bible. Or certainly I'm not. And I sit on the shoulders of people throughout history who've read that. So it's great to read somebody from 500 years ago, somebody from 1,000 years ago, somebody from 1,500 years ago, and how did they understand this? And it's great to read, people of different nations, or men and women, and kind of saying, actually, what is this saying? It doesn't mean that the truth changes, but sometimes they may reveal a blind spot, which I just don't see.
Yeah. Oh, massively. There's a theme emerging a little bit in the comments from Bob, Rachel, a couple of others along this line. So Rachel says, I can't remember the guy's name, but he was asked if he was left or right wing, and he said, name the issue. And Bob has said something like that, name the issue. On the whole, I would say I'm centre left, but occasionally I might lean centre right, depending on what the issue is at hand in the moment. Yeah, so it's that whole thing, but then not letting the tribal identities kind of win out. So given all of that, does faith and the Bible have any place in the public square, which is the fancy way of saying anything outside of your private life. And it's probably worth saying that the only reason we have that kind of question is because of Western thought decided that it would be much simpler and easier a few hundred years ago to kind of separate out faith and religion from the rest of life, stop it getting all messy, and so made it a private thing, which is where you get this kind of instinct that faith should be a private thing, religion should be a private thing, the rest of your life is kind of over there, faith, religion's over there, and you kind of keep the two separate, and people get super touchy. So any kind of like Western democracy will have a version of that. And it's interesting, they all have very slightly kind of different versions of that. But then it keeps back and forthing because, I would say for myself, my own faith is inseparable from what I do day to day. So I cannot have a private bit of my life. And, if the laws of the land also affect how I live my life, then the laws are interacting with my faith. It's kind of impossible not to do that. And so I can certainly see why people start to put faith out there. But I would say also the experience of the evangelical church in a bit in the UK and a lot in America has been mixed results when getting into bed with power. And it's a thing that is commonly said is that people tend to look back at times when Christians under oppression, or places in the world where Christianity is a minority and under pressure, and tend to say we are at our best when we're the outsiders, under pressure, persecuted, all that kind of thing. And when we get into bed with power, things go wrong. And the famous historical one is when, essentially the whole Roman Empire converted to Christianity. A lot of people felt like it lost its Christianness at that point. How do you feel about all those issues, Andy? Should faith have anything to do with the public square? Should it be getting over bed with power? This big issue that's been rolling for several centuries. Can you just solve it for us now?
In 30 seconds. In 30 seconds. Wow. Yes. No. So I guess our tutors at college would there's no neutral. There's no kind of there's nobody that sits looking out at the world from a neutral place. Everybody has a kind of a viewpoint on the world, kind of lenses they wear, shaped on a whole bunch of things. And one of those things, often a very major thing, will be what they believe about God, the afterlife, humanity. And you can't hide that. So one of the things I was chatting to our students about this week was I talked about the U.S. Declaration of U.S. Constitution. It says, we believe that all men, and it would have said men at the time, are created equal, and we believe these truths to be self-evident. Well, the interesting thing is that's not a self-evident truth. If you believe that the world is simply an accident and that we came about by chance through a byproduct of kind of undirected atheistic evolution, and that's a discussion we're not having, but if you believe that God's not involved at all, then to believe that kind of all people are created equal, that's not self-evident at all. We're the byproduct of the strong winning over the weak. And so actually it's interesting, that viewpoint is a very kind of based on a Christian viewpoint that says all human beings are made in the image of God, and therefore all human beings have dignity and worth. Now, the problem is, I think people try to go, that's just a neutral viewpoint, it's self-evident, but it's not self-evident at all. In fact, Tom Holland, who is quite a famous author, who's a historian and he's not a Christian, he wrote a book called Dominion recently. He said, people that like to kind of claim human rights just exist are grasping onto it's a statement of faith as much as saying that Jesus was born of a virgin. It's just they don't like to admit it. And he's not a Christian, which I think is amazing. So I think there's no view from nowhere. Everybody has a worldview, everybody has a belief, and you can't just ignore that in the public sphere as much as many people would want to.
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's no separating it out. And again, on the comments, we've got Matthew Firth again, who is a fellow. I've seen this.
I've seen this guy. I've seen this guy on Twitter, and on a few. Yeah, I've seen he popped up a few times. I've never met him, but I thought I recognised the name. There you go.
Yes, I do. I've met and I know Matthew, and he loves a political spat on social media.
Quite vocal. From afar, I've seen.
Absolutely. And as he says, as a vicar, when people tell me to stay out of politics, I just tell them no. And
that'd be quicker than my answer. That'd be quicker than my answer, Matthew, wouldn't it?
Yeah, but it doesn't fill an hour. So what are you going to do that? So and then we started this for people who don't have faith, who are skeptical, who are curious. We welcome everyone who's here for whatever reason. But
even vicars.
It's become a vicar fest because do you know who else is with us?
No,
tonight?
Tell me who else is on with us. Go on, tell me.
Mark Harlow.
Do you know? I do know Mark Harlow, so I don't just know him from electronically. I know him in real life.
We know, yeah, he's like as a real actual person, and he's got a super vicary photo on his Facebook thing there.
Well, he's in a family of two vicars. So
he's
anyway,
Reverend and Reverend.
No, sorry.
Sorry. That's their name when they go on Britain's Got Talent, for whatever the title would be. So is division purely a human-driven trait, or is there institutional and systemic drivers, e.g. two-party dominated democracy, leads towards division, opposition? Does the Bible lead us to seek alternative systems or sit as a critical observer?
Oh my goodness, Mark. Can you get him on as a special guest to answer his own question? That's unfair. You can't ask a question like that from afar.
That feels like a 3,000 word theological essay at college of a question, doesn't it?
Discuss, compare and contrast.
But I think what he's getting at is it an inherent human thing that we form tribes and fall out with each other, or do we sit within a system that is forcing us into camps essentially? And is the Bible asking us to do something else, or just sit back and criticize? So there's a few different questions there. I think. Can we jump to the what, you know, is the Bible leading us to seek an alternative way? Because that's really interesting, isn't it? Mark said, "Sorry, you will be." So, no, it's a great question. Later. I say it's a great question. It's 3 great question mark. What you put there. But yeah, is the Bible seeking an alternative way? So this is. I'm just going to throw my opinion up there. When I see what Jesus does and says and how he interacts with the powers of the day and with the political powers and the political questions, is he, to me, is 9 times out of 10 going for the third option. So where people are like, you know, it's this or this, and he'll come up with another way. You know, I think the whole Sermon on the Mount, especially the turn the other cheek, there's something he is doing there that, you know, like the fact that the Sermon on the Mount, which doesn't take a long time to read, but it takes people years to get their heads around, if ever, because he's trying to turn the whole way we do things on their head. So, for example, the go the extra mile thing, that's Roman soldiers could ask any civilian to carry their stuff for a mile, and he's saying, go beyond that, go the other mile. And, you know, people have claimed there's all sorts of things going on there, from simply showing love and grace to someone. So I'm not just going to do what I'm required of you, but I'm going to actually choose to help you to, this is a form of passive resistance, because it's going to get that soldier in trouble, and he's going to tell you to put down the pack, and it's going to embarrass him, you know, and it could be either of those things. Be both of those things, neither of the things. He might be doing something else. When someone shows, asks, do we pay our money to the temple tax or to the Roman authorities? You know, who? And, you know, he says, you know, whose picture is on that coin? And it's Caesar, pay to Caesar what Caesar's, pay to God's what's God's. Again, you know, he asks this really deep, searching question, which puts it back on the people who are just trying to form simple tribal parties. So I would think, my gut instinct is that Christianity is always going its own way, but doing so in quite creative ways within the culture that's engaged and not disengaged, not kind of sitting on the sidelines and throwing pot shots. Do you have any thoughts on that there, Andy?
Do you know, yeah, the thing that comes to mind, and maybe it's kind of cheeky to whack it in, but I think is actually in relation to the whole centerpiece of the Christian faith. One of the ways that somebody that we both love, who writes about it, and he would recount that story of the prodigal son, which is, if you haven't come across it, it's the story where Jesus talks about this guy that's got 2 sons, a younger one and an older one, and the younger one kind of asks for his inheritance before the father dies, and then he goes off and he spends it and ends up in a pigsty because there's a famine, and then basically ends up kind of thinking, oh my goodness, maybe I could be like one of my father's servants at home. And he runs home thinking, I'm going to say sorry. And the father comes out and he embraces him and he forgives him and puts a ring on his finger and a robe on his, gets the robe and puts sandals on his feet, and they go and have a party. And in the midst of that, the older son gets really hacked off. He's like, why is this guy throwing a party? And Tim Keller, who both of us, Dave, really like, who's a profound Christian pastor and writer, basically says that the younger son is like irreligion. He's like kind of running off, doing his own thing. He's like kind of Elsa in Frozen, let it go, just, no right, no wrong, no rules for me, I'm free. And so goes off and is kind of irreligious, kind of goes off and does their own thing, forgets God. And then the older son is like the person who kind of staying at home, is working in the field, is obeying the father, but out of duty. And it's like religion. I'm going to earn it. I'm going to be good enough as I can for the father. And then actually what we see is the son coming back and being accepted. And so you've got religion, you've got irreligion. And then you've got the gospel, which is actually about us receiving our identity. It's about us receiving our forgiveness. It's not something we achieve. And so in that sense, we have a third way, and that's at the very center of the Christian faith. So if you ever wonder what the Christian faith is about, that's it. It's about forgiveness is received, not achieved. We're adopted into God's family as forgiven children, not because we've earned it, but because Jesus pays for it with his own life on the cross. And so I think for me, that's the epitome, the kind of pinnacle of a third way, really, would be what I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And small bit of ridicule from my wife here for mentioning Tim Keller.
That's out of order. I almost wasn't going to mention him, but then anyway, sorry.
We do. No, we're. I'm unashamed. We are Tim Keller fanboys, and
do you know? It's really embarrassing. I don't know if you can see it, but I'm just trying to look where it is. Somewhere, I think it.
You've got a little photo of Tim up on.
I've got a little
watching over you.
Watching over it, and
I'm gonna guide people to it, right? Okay. So if you go to the top left of the bookcase and go right, there's a little frame on that top shelf, as you can see it, and there's Tim Keller watching over us.
There
he is.
Yeah.
There he is.
Yeah.
There he
is.
But
I need to explain to people why. So the reason is, I think it was our first. We've been in Derby for like 3 months, and we had a Secret Santa, and one member of my team thought it'd be hilarious because she got me that. And she got me a bar of dairy milk with Oreo, and then she got me a fridge chocolate milkshake. And to be honest, I was set. I thought there were 3 wonderful gifts. But it means that Keller is now sitting in front of his books, watching over us. But it's always slightly amusing when I'm filming something for church or here this evening. So there we go.
But if you want to be affirmed, Matthew Firth has said Andy has a very strong bookshelf game. So
do you know, it's actually all fake. They're all just kind of little covers that have just been whacked on there.
But to pick up the serious point and around everything that we've been discussing is Tim Keller's kind of like in the Christian, like you won't know him, you're not a Christian, but in the Christian world, he's kind of known as a bit of a planet-sized brain in terms of connecting the Bible to culture. And we both listened to a long-form interview with him recently. If you are interested in this, if you go to the Kerry Newhoff podcast, leadership podcast, it's on there. It's really interesting.
It's NIEU Newhoff HOF. It's a bit weird. It's episode 339, isn't it?
Yeah. Oh, well done. There you go. And so it's on there. It's a really good read. But the bit that stuck out to me was, this guy who's kind of renowned for being able to connect the Bible to contemporary culture was saying if he was starting a church again now and preaching again, because he's recently retired, he said he would have to spend a lot of time retooling to get ready for it. So you realize that it's not simple connecting these dots. It's not easy to know how to relate to the world, how the Bible relates to politics. It takes careful thought, and it takes a community. It takes a lot of listening to each other. And if white people could say anything about race right now, it's listen to the black voices that are out there, because there's some amazing things being said, and I just totally gone back to school this week listening to some of the things that are coming out from people. But to go back to the third way thing, because there always a third way. It's always kind of creative. We've got 7 minutes left. What's the third way right now? In this moment that we're finding ourselves in, COVID, racial tensions, world being disrupted like we've never seen it before. So this is for you, Andy. This is for me. This is for everyone in the comments who's watching. What is the Jesus way? What is the third way in a moment like this?
Yeah, I think the thing that comes to mind immediately is a phrase that, again, that we're stealing from somebody else, but talks about being a non-anxious presence in an anxious world. So kind of, there's something around being a person of peace, I think, which, and peace isn't an absence of isn't just an absence of conflict. It's deeper than that, and I think it's so easy, isn't it, with all that's going on, to just be not know which way to turn, to be in fear about COVID, or what's going to happen about the economy, or and then all the kind of the unsettledness, and some of that unsettling is right in relation to what we're having to learn and listen and think through and pray, for followers of Jesus to pray through. But I think there is something there about being a person of peace in these days, which obviously isn't something you just go, all right, I'm going to be peaceful, but actually is something that we would say is something we have to seek from coming from a place and knowing that we're loved, knowing that God's got this, that He's holding this, that we know how the story ends. It's not just going, oh, I'm a peaceful person because I'm not a peaceful person. My wife will tell you that a lot of the time, but actually I know somebody who is, and I've got to allow that. We've got to allow that to permeate our lives, I would say.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I think to get to this idea that peace isn't just being chilled out, like it's something much bigger. So again, the Bible was not written in English. Incredibly, it was written predominantly in Hebrew and Greek, the two halves that Andy was talking about, and the Old Testament is written in Hebrew, and the word for peace is shalom, a word that Hebrew-speaking people today still use, and that word is about wholeness. It's about the whole world being as it should be, which means the presence of things like justice. And I was listening to a podcast today, and one of the quotes that kind of stuck with me from it was that it's not enough in a racist world to not be racist. You have to be anti-racist, and being anti-racist is hard work. And I'd say, pursuing justice, pursuing peace, being people of peace, hard work. And it's not obvious work. It's, as we're saying, it requires a bit of knowing what God's up to. Going back to the Bible thing, you need this guideline that's outside of the current system, which is falling apart. But I feel like this is a moment like no other to do that, because if anything, I would say our culture before this moment was marked by apathy, by an intense busyness at work, and then switching your brain off to almost complete idle in the evenings and the weekends. So either crazy busy with work or completely brain dead, but certainly not wishing to engage with the real questions of life and faith and what's it all about. And we couldn't have started something like this podcast, a couple of months ago. Just people just wouldn't be interested. It would literally be us two having a great time talking to each other, but no one else would be.
Which is what we kind of do on the phone. We can't go do on the phone, but it's
we do. We just switched it to being on Facebook and YouTube, basically, because we love this kind of chat. But there's a phrase from another one of our faves, John Tyson in New York. He's actually from Australia, but in New York now. The crystallization of discontent. And it's probably not his originally, is it? Do you know who it was originally?
Sounds good though. I mean, yeah, I'd claim it.
Yeah, I don't know whose it was first. I learned that phrase from him, and it's this thing of like, people will put up with things that are wrong for quite a while, even indefinitely, as long as it remains kind of a niggle. But basically, we reach this peak when we just can't put up with it anymore, which he calls the crystallization of discontent, and when people take action. And I wonder whether, what's happening in America right now, and actually has spread global, was kicked off by an event that has happened tens of thousands of times before. But I wonder whether the amount of anger in people's system right now just crystallized all that discontent and actually moved people to action. And it's often said about Gen Y, Gen Z, the kind of like under 35s.
Gen Z, Dave? Do you say Gen Z?
Oh, no, they're super young, aren't they? No, that's right. Yeah.
It was just the Z. I just wondered where you... Yeah, that's fine. Carry on. Gen Z, that's fine.
Yeah, no, we have to think about them as well now. Yeah, they're like proper people and everything. So basically, anyone under 35, a criticism that's often been thrown is, they've got all these ideas and this passion, but they don't do anything with it. But we're at a moment where people are starting to do something with it, and I think for Christians, this is the moment to crystallize our discontent as well, and to start engaging and figure out what these creative ways of engaging are, and they're probably not going to be the ways of the past, and it's probably going to be something a little bit left of field. It's going to be this third way of Jesus thing. It's going to take some creative imagination and probably a lot of prayer, but I do feel like that this is a moment, like probably a once in a lifetime type moment to move and take action and not just do what we've always done. Is that fair to say, Andy?
Sounds good to me, mate. Sounds really good.
Okay. A few people saying on the comments that about that YouGov survey that happened early on, where only 9% want to go back to the way things were pre-COVID. And we were having that chat with our neighbours the other day. They're just like rethinking the whole of life, and there are some themes that are coming up here that are really resonant with Christianity, things around the issues of justice, around the issues of family life and hurry, things people are discovering, that they're spending more time with their family and not so much time running around like crazy. It's quite good. Asking justice. Christianity has stuff to say to all of these things, and hopefully we can pick up on some of them in the weeks to come. But yeah, now is a great moment. So if you've not considered this, if you're one of those skeptics, pick up a Bible if you have one. If you don't, the Bible app is free and it's fantastic. If you don't even want to go that far, you can go on your browser and go to BibleGateway.com. Read one of the Gospels. See what you think about this Jesus guy. He's got some incredible things to say. You will leave with more questions than you came with. Come back to us, pop us those questions. If you've got a particularly great question, we will base a whole week's discussion on it, because we exist for people like yourselves. If you're a Christian and you're watching this and this is helpful and you're enjoying it, thank you for joining us. You're very welcome to join us on this as well. We're going to be back next week with another question to discuss, which we don't know what it is yet.
Because somebody might send something in which we can answer.
Well, yeah, indeed. And
or talk about. I mean, answer is strong. I mean, talk around
is a
it.
Very strong word for what we're doing. Jabbering on relentlessly. So yeah. Anyway, thank you so much for joining us. We will be here again next week, next Thursday at 8 p.m. Thank you for spending this hour with us. It's such a privilege. If you do have questions for future things, you can message on the Storyhouse Facebook or the Storyhouse website, or if you're friends with either Andy or myself on Facebook, Instagram, just direct message us with your questions and we will more than happily jump on that. We would love to. But yeah, thank you for joining us this evening. See you again next week. Oh, wait a second. There we go.